Welcome to the Deeper Dive Podcast. My name's Dan.
And I'm David. Dan and I have been friends for a very long time and have found that we enjoy deep discussions, especially about biblical and spiritual topics. Along the way, we thought you'd like to join us.
As a result, we came up with this concept of this podcast, The Deeper Dive, where we'll be discussing biblical, spiritual topics that maybe at first glance may appear to be difficult or controversial, maybe even hard to believe. Hey, David, you came up with today's topic. Why don't you tell our people, our listening audience, what you chose for us to talk about and why?
Certainly, Dan. Today's topic is the places of the dead. And the reason I chose this topic is because, I dare say, most people believe in heaven, as defined by Bugs Bunny. A place in the clouds with harps, no crying, and angels. They also believe in hell, a place of fire, brimstone, and punishment. As we will see, both of these concepts are mostly wrong, mostly molded by Hollywood's perception of eternity. Using the Bible as our source material, we will discover that there are a total of 13 places of the dead and the unseen world. Like last week's topic, why did Jesus have to die such a gruesome death? I believe listeners will be challenged by what the Bible says versus what we've been unwittingly taught to believe. And Dan, before we dive into it, when you began your research to discuss this topic, would you have guessed a figure as high as 13 as the number of dwelling places for the dead?
Absolutely not. No, it's I like you said, most of what I've understood would be that there were two places, heaven or hell. I hate to bring up that ridiculous bumper sticker, eternity, smoking or non-smoking. I bet you some people have heard that. I know you have seen that one before. That's all we tend to think about. And the idea that there's 13 descriptions in the Bible for what happens after we die is a pretty interesting thing. And I'm eager to dive in.
And much like you, before I received a gift from a pastor friend that we both grew up under spiritually, I had no idea. This gift was a book that I personally consider one of the greatest reads outside of the Bible, one that shaped me and caused tremendous spiritual growth in my life. That book is The Footsteps of the Messiah by Arnold Fruchtenbaum. That has to be the greatest name ever for an author.
Absolutely. Fruchtenbaum. Well, that introduction, let's just strap in and get started. Places of the dead. What happens after we die? Take it away, man.
All right. In the Old Testament, written in Hebrew and the Greek New Testament, as noted, there are a total of 13 different terms describing the unseen world. These words need to be understood to fully comprehend the places of the dead and the unseen world. With that, Dan, why don't you begin by taking us to the first location?
Wow, I feel like I'm a travel guide or something. Come with me as we go to this terrifying concept of what happens post-death. Yeah, so one of the most common ones, the biggest ones, I was familiar with this just because of, my own studies, is the idea of, or the term, I should say, Sheol. It's a Hebrew word, Sheol. It's huge in the Old Testament, and it means, let me put it this way, it has a wide range of meaning, as many ancient words do. This term can refer to the grave. It is sometimes translated the grave, or like a pit, like what you would think of where we throw bodies or something in a mass grave, or even the tomb, or just tombs itself. Some older translations of the Bible in English incorrectly, unfortunately, translate it to the word hell. And we'll talk more about that in a bit. I think you've got some things to say about that later, dude. But yeah, that's not what it means. The ancient thought was that there was a world below us, where you go when you die, an underworld. It's very common in a lot of ancient mythology and religious thought and thinking. If you go to the Bible and go to its order, it's part of that kind of traditional thinking, but there are some significant differences. Now, to go through the Bible, there's two ways you can go through it. You can go through it like in the order that it's presented to you, Or you can go in what's more probably the written order, which is a little more fun because you can see thought development, okay, and the story of the Bible presented that way. So one of the first books to actually be written down, a lot of people think, is the book of Job. That's probably going to surprise some people. Well, no, it's got to be Genesis. No, actually, no. Job predates Moses, and Moses wrote Genesis. So yes, Genesis has subject matter that happened first. But I'm talking about written order right now. And Job, in chapter 7, verses 9 through 10, he brings up this for the first time, I think, the idea of Sheol. He says, as the cloud fades and vanishes, so he who goes down to Sheol does not come up. He returns no more to his house, nor does his place know him anymore. And if you know the story of Job and what's going on in that book, he's lamenting his life. He's had a bunch of horrendously tragic events occur, and he talks about having nothing left to do but die. And that's just going to be the end of it. And death is described as, quote, going down to Sheol and not returning. And so that's a cool way of looking at this description of the idea of what happens after death. We go down. 65 times in the Old Testament does the word Sheol pop up, and about 40 of those, maybe more, it's hard to count it up, indicate in their statements that this is a place, Sheol is a place you go down to or potentially up from, and it's somehow in the depths or below us, underground. Some of the passages that say the word describe it as something that's deep, in contrast to, for example, the heavens, which are high and above us. Job will also use death and going to Sheol, describing it like as going into the dark or into the darkness, which going down and it being a dark place, it makes sense considering what we do with our dead. What do we do, Dave, when somebody dies?
We bury them.
Yeah, you put them in the ground. They go down. They're under our feet now. You cover them up with dirt. Or if they're in a tomb, you seal them up. So in the ancient mindset, generally speaking, that when that happens, you're closed up in a dark place. And they imagine the afterlife to therefore also be some kind of a deep, dark place. Many ancient stories of the dead, the underworld, the netherworld, talk about it that way. And Job seems to be feeling about it also when he describes Sheol as kind of a, not only where everybody goes, but also therefore a great equalizer. No matter how rich you are, no matter how poor you are, how good you were, how bad you were, everybody goes here. You can't take nothing with you. You equally enter into this state of afterlife described with this word, Sheol. You go down there. It's the finality of everything. And he was hoping for it as an end to his life of suffering on this earth. That's what he was looking forward to. So that's Job. He mentions it a bunch of times. Continue the storyline, we go to Genesis then. Ironically, I'm going to say back to Genesis, even though it's the first book of the Bible. I already said what's up with that. But you got it being described by Abraham's grandson. In case you don't know, Abraham is the man that God came to and said, hey, I'm going to start a family with you that's going to grow into a great nation and change and bless the entire world. He's referring, of course, to Israel and eventually Jesus Christ himself. Abraham's grandson, a dude named Jacob, he speaks of Sheol just very simply as the place where he's going to go when he dies. Once again, Genesis 37:35. Says all his sons and daughters rose up to comfort him, and he refused to be comforted. Now he's in a bad place right now because his favorite son he thinks is dead. Okay? He thinks Joseph is dead. And so all his other sons and daughters come and they try to comfort him. And he says, no, I shall go down to Sheol to my son mourning. In other words, I'm going to cry until I die. But something special about what he's saying there is he's saying that because his son is there, he thinks Joseph is already there in Sheol, I'm going to go to him. So therefore, what we see there is this idea developing that not only do we go Sheol when we die, and it might be a dark place, but we're going to find each other there. We're going to be able to connect and reconnect That language, though the word Sheol is not used, is used when Abraham dies earlier in the book, because it says he was gathered to his ancestors. And that's a concept that's all over the world, not just in the Bible in those days, the idea of going back to your ancestors. So there's going to be reconnecting there. People who have been lost are kind of really found. So in Moses' time, Genesis continues with lots of people referring to Sheol as a place you go when you die, the place you reconnect with family that's gone before you. And then Moses, he's confronted, I should say, by a bunch of guys that were jealous of his authority and his, just the fact that God chose to use him. And they said, why can't we be in charge? Why can't we be talking directly to God? In doing that, they were angering God because they were basically saying God chose the wrong man. And in Numbers, the book of Numbers 16, chapter 16, Moses is talking and he says, if these men die as all men die, in other words, they get old, they die, get sick and die, or if they're visited by the fate of all mankind, then the Lord has not sent me. He was predicting their punishment. But if the Lord creates something new, and the ground opens its mouth and swallows them and all that belongs to them, and they go down alive into Sheol, then you know these men have despised the Lord. And a few verses later, that exact thing happens. The ground opens up and they fall into a crevice, and it closes up over them. And this same description is used. They went alive into Sheol. That's interesting. It seems to think that Sheol, the place of the dead, is literally the dirt underneath us. Because we know spiritually they didn't necessarily go into the afterlife, but physically they fell into a crevice and it closed over them and crushed them. And then spiritually they went to Sheol. But in a way, by going into the earth, it's like they went there alive. So the narrative goes on and on and on, talking about Sheol as a place of final destination. Some people go easily into Sheol. Some people go violently, peacefully, or in sadness. The book of Psalms has a lot of stuff about that. Some describe it as a trap. Psalm 18:5, the cords of Sheol have entangled me. In other words, I'm going to die before my time. People are attacking me. I'm trying to escape. Sometimes it's a metaphor for terrible circumstances. And the psalmist cries out for deliverance from Sheol. David wrote in Psalm 6, Lord, deliver my life, save me from the sake of your steadfast love, for in death there is no remembrance of you. In Sheol, who will give you praise? That's interesting. Dave, do you think that's saying that when I'm dead, I can't praise God?
That's a tough one. Because
yeah, it is.
We are conscious, we have awareness in death. We do not have physical bodies, but we are aware.
Mm-hmm.
And there is, we're going to get into this a little bit more a little later on, we have the ability to communicate.
Mm-hmm.
But depending on where you are, this is going to flush itself out as we talk. The ability to praise is going to be determined by where you are.
Interesting. Yeah, no, that's good. I can't wait to get into that more, because just on the surface, that's an interesting thing for David to write, right? Just if I'm dead in Sheol, God, what good is that to you? I can't worship you there.
I have a question for you.
Sir.
Based on that last verse about being swallowed up and going to Sheol, being swallowed up by crevice, you don't in any way mean by quoting that verse that if someone was to get a shovel, they could eventually dig down far enough to physically find Sheol, do you?
No, I don't. And that's I kind of hinted at that, but thank you for bringing it out. Because, just falling into the ground doesn't mean I'm in Sheol in a physical sense. It can't be, because we've been drilling ever since that stuff has been written, and we haven't found it yet. I've actually heard some people actually say, "Oh, we think it's in the core of the earth." I don't see any evidence that the earth opened that big for these people to have fallen all the way there. That's not a necessary conclusion. I think it just is a metaphor for the fact that they went into the dirt alive. In a way, you could say they were buried alive. I think that's a better reading of the text. Good question, man. Yeah, so I know this is a lot, but I'm bringing it around here. as the Bible continues and its narrative continues, we got, after King David, his son Solomon, he uses Sheol as a warning, like, don't go there before your time, because, death. People say, I pull my kid away from getting too close to the edge of the Grand Canyon. You're going to die, kid. Don't go there. It's that kind of thing. In Proverbs 5:3-5, talking about the immoral woman hanging out on the street, and he tells his son, don't go follow her. The lips, chapter 5:3-5, the lips of a forbidden woman drip honey. Sounds yummy. And her speech is smoother than oil. She's fun to talk to and listen to, and she seduces. But in the end, she is bitter as wormwood, sharp as a two-edged sword. Her feet go down to death. There it is again, down. And her steps follow the path to Sheol. She's the grave. Don't go there. And assuming he wrote Ecclesiastes is written by Kohelet, the preacher. A lot of people attribute it to Solomon, or maybe his wisdom, kind of school of wisdom, whatever the case. Ecclesiastes 9:10, whatever your hand finds to do, do it with your might. There is no work or thought or knowledge or wisdom in Sheol to where you're going. And the point being, you can't work anymore. You're done. This is your time. So don't go to Sheol and let things undone. Okay? So it's interesting to point out, I think you may have observed this too, dude, that Sheol, everything up to this point that I've pointed out, is described by people. It's not like a doctrine being given by God. It's not some teaching coming from God or even teaching from people. It's just people referencing it in their poetry, in their perspectives, and in their teaching about other things. No actual doctrine is being offered. It's just there as an understood. But then when you get into the prophets, God speaking through these prophets, God starts using the term himself. And it affirms everything we've been saying up until this point. Isaiah 7:11. God comes to a king and offers him the opportunity to ask him for anything, absolutely anything. And the way he describes the wide range of things he could ask, he says, be it as deep as Sheol or as high as heaven. Again, Sheol being the bottom, heaven being the top. Okay? And that's not even, again, so you asked it, it's not even a physical thing. That means just conceptually, spiritually even. It is often, again, described as the place where people die, and people go when they die, I should say. It's described as death, sometimes vaguely, or just where we go afterwards, as we've been saying. It's described as mysterious. It's a great equalizer, like Job said. The end of our efforts and opportunities to glorify God in this life. But before we move on, I got to point that there's a promise made in one of these prophets that I thought was kind of cool. In Hosea 13, chapter 13, I say, verse 14 says, I shall, is God speaking through the prophet, I shall ransom them from the power of Sheol. I shall redeem them from death. O death, where are your plagues? O Sheol, where is your sting? Compassion is hidden from my eyes. Apparently, there's a desire on God's part to save some people, his people, from this death, from what Sheol represents. Not just figuratively in terms of rescuing people from an earthly danger, but from the grave itself and the problems of the grave. And I will point out, understanding the Bible story, if we understand Genesis correctly, I believe we should know that death for humans was not originally the plan. Adam and Eve, if they didn't eat that forbidden fruit in Genesis 3, they could have stayed in the garden. They could have kept eating from the tree of life. Death would not have entered the human experience at all. So, Sheol is a problem, and God wants to solve that problem. That's what I got on Sheol. What you got, my friend?
Very interesting. I think, Dan, as we get further into this, we're going to find that there are many, many more questions than answers provided. Moving forward, though, the second word for the unseen world is Greek. Dan, if the word in discussion is Greek, where would that be found in the Bible?
That would be the New Testament.
The New Testament. The second word for the unseen world is Hades, and it is found only in the New Testament. It is mentioned 10 times in the New Testament, passages like Matthew 11:23. And you, Capernaum, will you be exalted to heaven? You will be brought down to Hades. For the mighty works done in you had been done in Sodom, it would have remained until this day. And as Dan pointed out, when they speak of heaven, it's usually in an upward form, and if they're speaking of Hades, it's always referred to as going down. Acts 2:27, for you will not abandon my soul to Hades, or let your Holy One see corruption. This is a quote from the Old Testament. Psalm 16:10, for you will not abandon my soul to Sheol, or let your Holy One see corruption. For the 10 references on Hades in the New Testament, 7 deductions can be made. I'm sure there's probably more, but there are 7 deductions that I came up with. How's that? Hades is the same as Sheol, Hades being the Greek term for the Hebrew word Sheol. That verse in Acts refers to Hades while quoting Psalms where the word is Sheol. Sheol and Hades are the same place. That's the first conclusion. The second is this. It was a place for both the righteous and the unrighteous. Luke 16:19-31. The unrighteous rich man is in Hades, but the righteous one, Abraham, was also in Hades. So, conclusion. Hades has 2 main compartments, for lack of a better word. The section for the unbeliever was Hades proper. The section for the believer was known as Abraham's bosom, which we'll discuss momentarily. The sections are separated by a great chasm, Luke 16:26. And besides all this, between us and you, a great chasm has been fixed, in order that those who would pass from here to you may not be able, and none may cross from there to us. One of the compartments, Abraham's bosom, was a place of comfort, while the other compartment was a place of torment. Both believers and unbelievers went down to Hades, but it was especially severe for the unbelievers. Flames, anguish, thirst, punishment. The direction of Hades was always downward, never upwards. It was a place of consciousness, not a place of unconsciousness, as I believe a lot of people believe. Hades, get this, this is important. Hades is a temporary state. It is not the eternal state. Revelation 20:13-14 says, and the sea gave up the dead who were in it. Death and Hades gave up the dead who were in them, and they were judged, each one of them according to what they had done. Then death and Hades were thrown into the lake of fire. This is the second death, the lake of fire. It must be noted that Jesus has authority over death and Hades, which are both ultimately temporary and will be cast into the lake of fire at the final judgment. Okay, we're starting to see some color. Which word is next, Dan?
I'll forgive you for getting ahead of stuff we're going to be talking about later. Yeah, but I am liking the color that's developing here, the detail. The next word that you gave me to look at, that's in the Bible, it's an interesting one. Not a lot of people think about it in regards to the afterlife, and that is the word Abaddon, or as you may have heard from a southern preacher, Abaddon. It's probably Abaddon or something like that. The word literally is a name word that comes from the verb to perish, to die. Sheol is naked before God, the Bible says, specifically Job 26. Sheol is that word again, naked before God, and Abaddon has no covering. So once again, it sounds like something that's the same as Sheol, like synonymous, because that's a Jewish or Hebrew, I should say better, poetic technique to say one thing, like Sheol is naked before God, and then to say in different words the same thing with Abaddon has no covering, indicating these are two equal things. Also in 31:12 of Job, describing terrible destruction, the end of all his stuff, and he says, for that would be a fire that consumes as far as Abaddon and would burn to the root all of my increase. Again, total, complete destruction, death itself, ending it all. Solomon in Proverbs 15:11, Sheol and Abaddon lie open before the Lord. How much more the hearts of the children of man? So why would he say both? If they're the same thing, why are both there? Some people wonder if it's like grave and death, like equivalent themes on the same event. 27:20, Sheol and Abaddon are never satisfied. And never satisfied are the eyes of man. He's making a point about human greed, but comparing it to how it doesn't matter how many people die and go down to Sheol, it won't be satisfied. It'll take everybody. That's the Old Testament. The New Testament, though, I hope I'm not being disrespectful by saying things get weird here. The book of Revelation, I think we can all agree, is pretty weird. And in Revelation 9:11, so John, the apostle of Jesus, having visions about a place that's described as the bottomless pit, quote unquote. And there's an angel that opens it. And it's like a scene from a horror movie. I mean, these demonic beings come out. And they're described like they have women's head and hair, and they are the bodies of locusts, and they got the stinger of a scorpion. And there's like this multitude of come out, and they attack everyone that don't belong to Jesus, specifically for like 5 months. And all these people, it's so bad that they wish they were dead. And about these beings, John, after he describes them, he writes this: they have as king over them the angel of the bottomless pit. His name in Hebrew is Abaddon, or Abaddon, and I think I've pronounced it 5 different ways so far just talking about it. 7? Okay, cool. That's what's weird about ancient languages. Sometimes we're not sure. But his name in Hebrew is Abaddon. There's 8. And in Greek, he is called Apollyon. So, a couple of things there. Greek Apollyon is literally just a Greek translation of the Hebrew Abaddon, and that means death, destruction, to destroy. But here's what's funny about it. Now Abaddon is a person, right? Not just a place, but a person. Some wonder if that means he's like the chief of these attacking beings, like the plain reading of the text implies, the angel of the bottomless pit. Some people wonder if it's a personification of the place, like a poetic device referring to the loss and destruction of the world. I think it's more likely the person that runs the place, or has the authority to open that door, at least, and lead the charge of these crazy beings. So Abaddon is Sheol. But what more color we're getting is the emphasis on the destructive element and ending that the grave and death is. And I think the Revelation passage gives us the idea of death erupting out onto a world under God's judgment. And that's that destructive element being played out in a really massive and terrifying way. So there you go, Abaddon.
I want to let our listeners know that Dan and I don't talk about the things that we've researched and the information that we're about to provide. So it's going to be interesting, the fact that he just, stole a great deal of what I'm about to say about the next place of the dead. The fourth term of the unseen world is the expression, you might have guessed it, the pit. The pit. And the next couple of questions I'm going to ask them, even though they sound completely ridiculous because, Dan's already explained this. Dan, if you were to guess, would you think that the pit is a New Testament or an Old Testament term?
Yeah. So the pit sounds, I'm just going to go off the top of my head and say that the pit sounds a lot like something that's more Old Testament, despite the fact that I just described it from the New Testament.
Yes.
It's just the general feeling we have, sometimes it's wrong, is that the Old Testament has all this imagery of being cast down and judged, and it is there, and the pit fits into that. You're
absolutely correct. The expression of the pit occurs 23 times in the Old Testament books: Psalms, Proverbs, Isaiah, and Ezekiel. Most of these being Ezekiel. If you were to take a guess, Dan, does your gut tell you the pit is a good place or a bad place?
I'm going to go out on a limb and say that sounds like a bad place.
You would be absolutely correct. The pit is always used in negative terms. Ezekiel 32:24. Elam is there, and all her multitude around her grave, all of them slain, fallen by the sword, who went down uncircumcised into the world below, who spread their terror in the land of the living, and they bear their shame with those who go down to the pits. According to this verse, the pit happens after death. One goes down to the world below, bearing shame. And 3 deductions can be made from the 23 references in the Old Testament. Like Abaddon, it is always used in negative terms. There is never anything positive about the pit. The direction of the pit is always downward, never upward. And as we've discussed, this does not mean that if we dig deep enough, we'll find the pit. What is meant biblically is that downward is a negative spiritual location. It's a negative experience. The term pit is a descriptive term used for the unrighteous portion of Sheol or Hades. And so the term the pit is synonymous with Abaddon. The latter is a proper name for the former, which is descriptive. Okay, Dan, where's the next place of the dead?
Well, similar to the idea of the pit is a word that a lot of people are probably familiar with, maybe not from the Bible, but the abyss. The abyss. It's not just a movie from 20, 25 years ago, dating myself, but the idea we even get from the idea of that movie. It's about these guys that are on the edge of a huge cliff in the ocean, and there's this gigantic chasm that goes down who knows how far. So we use terms like an abyss for that, but the word abyss, as you see it in the Bible, is literally a carryover word from Greek. And what I mean is they didn't translate it, they just brought the word over. The word abusos, which means something bottomless. Bottomless, like it just goes down forever. And so when the Greeks were talking about Hades and the place of the dead, they were often imagining, if you see another movie, if you've seen Hercules, you got that where Hades is a person. Hades is the god of the dead in Greek mythology, and you have that big chasm where all the souls go down to. That's what they had in mind. In the Bible, you saw the place, the chasm where all the souls are. At the very bottom of this bottomless pit, if that could be said, is where the worst of the worst, the enemies of the gods, were kept. Okay. Now in the Bible, there's some correlations here. Twice in the Bible, this word is used. One of which is an interesting story many people may have heard about, where Jesus is walking around with his disciples a little bit outside of the territory of Israel, and they're among people who are herding pigs, what Jews would never do because of the kosher laws. But these guys have pigs over here, but right in front of Jesus is a guy who's got what is described as a legion of demons. The Roman legion consisted of 5,000 or 6,000 soldiers. So we don't know exactly how many demons were in this guy, but when Jesus asks what his name, he says legion because we are many. So the idea is there's a lot of demons in this guy, and they know who Jesus is. And they are about to be cast out of this man. Jesus did this a bunch of times. This is no secret. They beg, actually. It says in verse 31 of Luke 8, they begged him not to command them to depart into the abyss. Interesting. So now we're not even talking about something that's necessarily about the place of the dead. This is the place that demons get imprisoned, it seems to be. That they did not want to go there. Don't take me to jail. It's basically their cry. Romans 10:7, Paul, much later, is asking a rhetorical question, though, that adds to this, or maybe even makes us more confused. He's asking a rhetorical question about the powerlessness of humanity, and he's saying, who's going to descend into the abyss as if to bring Christ from the dead? And next he says, who can ascend to heaven to bring him down? So dead people can go there? Interesting. Not a lot to go on here, but these two statements. But then we come back to Revelation 9, verses 1 and 11. Once again, the angel of the bottomless pit. Bottomless pit. That's a translation of abusos, the abyss. So assuming that's the same place, which we have every reason to do. And this Abaddon dude is the angel of the abyss. And it's from the abyss that these demonic hordes are unleashed on the earth. Later in Revelation, during Jesus' return and judgment, in Revelation 17, the beast, or sometimes called the Antichrist, he rises up from the abyss, it says. In Revelation 20, it says that Satan is going to be imprisoned in the abyss temporarily for 1,000 years. So primarily, it looks like this word abyss is referring to a place of demonic confinement, a paranormal penitentiary, if you will. Forgive me, I had to do it. And apparently God can allow prisoners in and out for his reasons. So that's the abyss. I don't know particularly. I'll admit to being a little confused as to how it fits into everything we've been talking about, though I'm sure it's related.
Well, something that I've added to the color, or I'm getting from this, is that places of the dead refer to places for human souls to go and for the fallen angels to be held. And all of these cases, thus far, these have been temporary abodes. Interesting. The sixth term that speaks of the unseen world, and this is an interesting one, and I actually love this word, is Tartarus. No, I am not speaking of the time-traveling machine from Doctor Who. That would be TARDIS, an acronym for time and relative dimension in space. But every time I hear the word Tartarus, I automatically think of Doctor Who. That's my shortcoming. I am also not
thinking of the. I'm sorry. I'm thinking of the stuff you put on fish.
Tartar sauce. I am also not referring to the primordial god and deep abyss in the Greek mythology, both representing chaotic and dark region beneath the earth. This is not what we're referring to. The word Tartarus is found only once in Scripture, that being 2 Peter 2:4. For if God did not spare angels when they sinned, but cast them into hell and committed them to chains of gloomy darkness to be kept until the judgment. That phrase, cast them into hell, could be read as cast them into Tartarus. That's what the original Greek says. There's only one verse, but we can come to 5 conclusions about Tartarus from 2 Peter 2:4. It is called gloomy darkness. Another version says the pits of darkness. So it has a negative connotation. It is a place for fallen angels, also referred to as demons. Dan, when we were originally discussing this topic, did you ever consider places of the dead, including angelic creations?
Normally, no. I hesitate simply because, and it gets us ahead to where we're eventually going to get here, the idea that I think as Jesus had said, that at some point he's going to take those who deserve eternal punishment to a place that's, quote, for the devil and his angels. So there was a prison, and the idea is a spiritual prison that we were never meant to go to, but was meant for them, and yet we're going to go. But when we started this conversation, to answer your question more directly, the idea of just where do I go when I die? No, I'm not thinking about where the bad angels end up, or where some of them are right now, whatever the case may be.
We're on the same page then. Here's a statement that I found very interesting when I was doing this, when I was studying for this topic. This Tartarus is connected with fallen angels in connection with Noah. How so? Well, this phrase refers to a specific event where certain angels sinned against God. The sin of these angels is often linked to Genesis 6, verses 1 through 4, where the sons of God are interpreted by some as angels who took human wives, leading to the Nephilim. Whereas,
here we go.
I almost wanted to avoid that passage altogether, but for full disclosure, I had to include it.
Yep.
The abyss is in connection with fallen angels in general. Tartarus is connected with fallen angels somehow related to the time of Noah. The angels mentioned in this verse are the same angels mentioned in Jude 6:7. Because of this connection between 2 Peter 2:4 and Jude 6:7, these angels are the sons of God in Genesis 6 who intermarried with human women to try to corrupt the seed of the woman. Now, this is obviously very controversial because there is a verse in the Bible that says angels don't procreate.
Mm-hmm.
That's simple. So how is it that angels intermarried with human women trying to corrupt their seed? There's a lot of unanswered questions here. But we do know, sticking to things that we know for sure, Tartarus is that portion of Sheol or Hades, which is a permanent place of confinement for those fallen angels who sinned in Genesis 6. While the abyss is a temporary place of confinement for fallen angels, a place where fallen angels or demons come and go for periods of time, Tartarus is different and is a permanent place of confinement. From this confinement, these angels will never be released, but will eventually go from Tartarus to the lake of fire. They will never be free again. Dan, do you want to take a guess why these angels are kept in a special place?
Because they did something extra bad, if I can say it that way. Because there's this idea that the demons are angels that rebelled against God. But these guys took it to such a point that their judgment was extra. So if you wanted to say that the pit and the abyss is their prison, these guys are in the maximum security. Tartarus is the maximum security area, and no one goes in there or out of there once they're there. That's just what's going on in my brain.
They get no special time in the yard each day either.
Nope.
No, you're absolutely correct. They are kept in Tartarus instead of the abyss because of the special nature of their sin. These are the angels that, Genesis 6, took on male form and intermarried with human women in order to corrupt the seed of women, producing a grotesque race. The wickedness of man reached its epitome because of this race, necessitating a worldwide flood to destroy all humanity with the exception of Noah's family. Dan, what's next?
Before I jump into it, what you just overviewed in 2 minutes might be worth its own episode. There's so much there. Wow. Well, hey, speaking of things that you would think take a long time to talk about, but are actually going to be treated very briefly here, it's probably going to surprise some people, and they're probably already surprised if they're listening this far, that when we're talking about the places of the dead, the idea of hell, that word, H-E double hockey sticks, hell, has not yet been addressed, and I'm about to address it right now. And there's a very good reason that we've been waiting on this one. I'm just going to say the blunt word for phrase here, and then we'll dissect it. Hell ain't in the Bible.
Oh, no.
Oh, no, dude,
Heresy.
these guys have gone liberal. No, I think it's obvious by now that I can say that we believe in eternal conscious punishment for sinners. If you've listened to our podcast up to this date, we've talked about that. And if you've been listening to this podcast, we've been saying that in different ways over and over and over again. So what do I mean when I say hell isn't there? Well, literally, there is no Hebrew or Greek term being translated into hell in the Bible. That word is not there. The word actually comes when they were translating the King James translation. And there's several things that happened. This happened a lot, actually, during the translating into the King James back in 1611. When they're looking at a word and making interpretive steps, making interpretive judgments on what words meant in their context, and sometimes coming up with a new word. So, when they were working on the King James, and they were coming across the word Sheol, and Hades, and Tartarus, like you just told us about, Dave, and Gehenna, which is coming up. We'll talk about that. I think that's you. They sometimes would take those words and put the word hell on top of them as a transliterated word from somewhere else. They just brought that idea of what hell is and just inserted it as a way to think about these places we're already discussing. The thing is, these places already have names. They already have locations. A lot of them mean the same thing, which is cool, or segments of the same thing, or parts of other places. They just put hell as this umbrella term to refer to God's eternal wrath and judgment with fire and torment on those who have sinned. But those places already exist, and there's no special anything or description of a place called hell. So when you read a Bible translation and that word hell comes up, what you should do in your brain is just go to, oh, he's probably talking about Tartarus for these demons that have done extra bad things, or Gehenna, which I'll ask you in a minute, Dave, to unpack for us, or Hades, just generally where the dead go, if I understand what we were saying, what you shared about Hades. However, that's not helpful, because Hades is where all the dead go to a point. And it would be wrong for us, with our understanding of the word hell, to say everyone went to hell, right? So I'll just go out and say it, that hell is kind of an unhelpful term. We'll use it in conversations where people understand what we're talking about, but to strictly understand what the Bible is saying, it's actually sometimes the wrong word to use. So, yeah, not much more to say than that about hell. And, we're talking about not where all the dead go, but where the ones who are under the wrong end of God's justice, those are the places we've already described, a place that you and I should try to avoid going. But as I actually, there are videos of this, and I've seen it where people, and there's even a song that some people unfortunately sing in church. I'm not going to hell. Like, first of all, that's not what I want to sing when I'm in church. Secondly, it's not a helpful term. So, Dave, you covered Hades and Tartarus, accurate terms. Why don't you help us out with Gehenna, like I already said?
All right. I do find it interesting, of all the places of the dead that we discussed, the one that's not actually really a Greek or Hebrew word is the one that Hollywood grabbed onto, and that's the one when we think about Halloween, we think about all those things, these are descriptions that come up. Again, Hollywood has influenced our way of thinking.
Yep.
The eighth term for the unseen word is my favorite word, in that it's just a cool word. It is a Greek word with caveats, and the word is Gehenna. Gehenna, as I said, is Greek, but the origin of the concept is Hebrew. It's actually a combination of two Hebrew words. The first is G-E-I, and the second is Hinnom. Hinnom means the Valley of Hinnom, which is outside the walls of Jerusalem. The valley circles Jerusalem on the west side around the wall to the south side, where it meets another valley known as the Kidron Valley. The Valley of Hinnom was a place where the wicked kings of Israel practiced human sacrifice. This practice meant that it was the place for the burning of humans. This Old Testament concept of burning of humans physically moves into the New Testament with the word Gehenna and describes the unseen world and the eternal burning of humans. There are 12 references to Gehenna in the Bible. 11 of these are in the Gospel. One such reference is Matthew 5:22. But I say to you that everyone who is angry with his brother will be liable to judgment. Whoever insults his brother will be liable to the council, and whoever says, "You fool," will be liable to the hell of fire. It is likely that if you read this version in your Bible, you will see a footnote next to the word hell. Hell is the Greek word Gehenna. The same is true of this passage, Luke 12:5. But I will warn you whom to fear. Fear him who, after he is killed, has authority to cast into hell. Yes, I tell you, fear him. That should read more accurately, has authority to cast into Gehenna. From the 12 verses in the Greek New Testament, 4 deductions can be made about Gehenna. Gehenna is the eternal abode for the lost, both angels and men. The punishment in Gehenna includes both soul and body. That is why Gehenna must not be translated as hell. Hell is a temporary place, and it's for the soul only. But Gehenna is an eternal place, and it includes both the soul and the body. It is eternal torment. Gehenna is also associated with fire. Fire is a source of torment, which leads us to, Dan?
The lake of fire. That phrase is probably one that's more popularly known. Most people who understand the biblical ideas, or what they think the biblical ideas of hell are, will also have in their head, rattling around, the idea of the lake of fire. What is that? Well, that phrase is exclusively found in the book of Revelation. And the reason for that is, we've been hinting it a few times here, that a lot of these places are holding places for a temporary purpose. Well, this is the permanent and forever one, the lake of fire. It is found toward the end of the book, when it talks about the Antichrist and the false prophet being thrown, quote, alive, so as you said, physically as well as spiritually, into this place in chapter 19, verse 20. Satan himself is held in the abyss, and I said temporarily because it says there that it's 1,000 years. And he's held there 1,000 years and then released and allowed to cause a rebellion against Jesus. But when the rebels are defeated in chapter 20, they're all wiped out. But the devil, it says, who had deceived them, was thrown into the lake of fire and sulfur, where the beast and false prophet were. And they will be tormented day and night forever and ever. I'll admit to not having all the answers about a lot of this stuff. This relates to the lake of fire. It relates to Gehenna, how we will be both, physically and spiritually in a state like that. How is it a spirit feels torment? I don't know. How fire it relates to that, I don't know. But what we ought to get from that is that it is a torment, and it is bad, it is painful. Anyone who has ever been burned can talk about that.
Some points that need to be brought out, if you don't mind my doing so.
Yeah.
I think back to last week's study about why Jesus had to die such a gruesome death. Of all the pain that Jesus experienced, being forsaken by the Father, worst of all the pain that he felt, that forsaken. Well, in hell, in the lake of fire, I should say, you are forsaken by the Father. The spiritual pain, and the only way that we can understand that spiritual pain is to look at Christ. But a lot of people think dead is dead and no longer existing. Well, that is, by these verses, completely 100% untrue. The soul, spiritual pain, and the body are reunited before they are thrown into the lake of fire. The body feels physical pain. This is not something where you burn up. Think burning bush. It continued to burn without burning up. Well, this here is a spiritual, physical burning that never consumes. Day and night, tormented forever and ever. This is a pain that you never get over. Some people think, well, if I'm there long enough, I'll get used to the pain. That is not the case. The pain is eternal, forever, and it is spiritual forever, because you have been forsaken by the Father.
Yeah, good point, man. I remember a professor talking about this in one of my seminary classes. I thought it was an interesting way. Obviously, there's some mystery here, so we can't nail it down completely. But like you said, Jesus was rejected by God. Forsaken was the word. That's what this is, eternally. The proposition was, God is the source of all goodness and all life, and you are unplugged from all goodness and all life eternally. Perhaps what that feels like is being consumed by fire, but unendingly. Like you said, you don't get consumed, and it's over. It's day and night, forever and ever. You're alive, but dying eternally. It's a scary and terrible thing. After Satan is thrown in there, where the beast and the false prophet are, like you said, the final judgment happens. Verse 13, chapter 20, I saw the dead, great and small, standing before the throne, and the books were opened. In case you don't get it, he describes it more. Another book is opened, was the book of life. The dead were judged. That was written in the books according to what they had done. I saw the sea. We read this earlier. Gave up the dead who were in it, death and Hades. Gave up the dead who were in them. So in case you didn't get it at the beginning, what he said, everyone who has ever died is now standing before the throne of God. Everyone. Every human being to have ever lived. And they were judged, each one of them, according to what they had done. Then death and Hades, in other words, all their contents, everyone that was there, humans, angels, everybody, were thrown into the lake of fire. This is the second death, the lake of fire. And if anyone's name was not written in the book of life, he was thrown into the lake of fire. So something a lot of people don't think through is that if I die and I have to pay for my sins eternally, upon my death, I will go to Sheol, I will go to Hades, I will go to the bad parts. We call it Abaddon, we call it Gehenna. Okay, we're there. But at some point we're brought out. We go there not knowing or understanding fully why we're there yet. I mean, we might conclude, I'm a bad person, okay, this is what's up. Or we might rage and say this isn't fair. But at a later point in time, each person will find themselves standing before Jesus Christ himself. And then their sentence will be explained, better yet, demonstrated. Here's what you did. Here's what you didn't do. And then the final judgment happens in this lake of fire. Is this when you think the body and the spirit of the sinner is reunited? Is that this point?
Yes.
Yeah. That's not something I've thought much about, so that's interesting. It's worth pondering. The wrath of God, in a state that goes on forever and ever. Man. All right, man. It's time to lighten the mood. Let's present an alternative.
The alternative.
Thank you.
Abraham's bosom, or the 10th term for the place of the dead. In rabbinic writings, this is a very common term. But in Scripture, we only see it once. Dan, is that surprising to you? The fact that we hear about Abraham's bosom so much, but it's only found in Scripture once?
It's an example of so many times that people will run with something that's just a mention, just a quick thing. Here it is.
Yes. It is a New Testament passage, and our beloved ESV does not translate it as Abraham's bosom. So it's only mentioned once, and if you read the translation that Dan and I read, it's not even translated Abraham's bosom, but it is translated Abraham's side, with a footnote that the Greek is bosom. Luke 16:22. The poor man died and was carried by the angels to Abraham's side. Footnote, bosom. The rich man also died and was buried. And in Hades, being in torment, he lifted up his eyes and saw Abraham far off and Lazarus at his side. Although this is the only biblical reference to Abraham's bosom, there are 6 things that we can learn from this verse. Abraham's bosom is for the righteous only. There will be no unrighteous there. It is located adjacent to hell. Remember, we talked about compartments. We use the word compartments because our English language does not allow us to come up with a real description, but go with me. It's in a compartment adjacent to hell. It is not hell, but it is located close enough that those in hell, like the rich man, are able to see what's going on in Abraham's bosom, though they have no way of getting there because of the abyss. While hell and Abraham's bosom are next to each other, they are separated by an impossible gulf, some say abyss. Each side can see the other, and those in them can converse with each other. Have you ever thought about this? They cannot cross over from one side to the other, but they can talk to each other. Abraham's bosom is that portion of Sheol, or Hades, which was a place for the righteous, whereas hell was the place for the unrighteous humans. The term Abraham's bosom is a figure of speech, describing a guest at a feast, reclining on the breast of his neighbor. Just as in the Gospel of John, John was reclining at Jesus' bosom at the feast of the Passover. This is what Lazarus was doing in Abraham's bosom. The term Abraham's bosom is a figure of speech describing a guest at a feast, reclining on the breast of his neighbor. Just as in the Gospel of John, John was reclining at Jesus' bosom at the feast of the Passover. This is what Lazarus was doing in Abraham's bosom. It is a figure of speech that a guest might make at a feast, reclining on the breast of his neighbor or host. Abraham's bosom symbolized blessedness after death. Lazarus did not do well while living in the material world, but after death, he was indeed in a state of blessedness.
I like how this figure of speech gives us what we're supposed to feel out of it. It's about comfort, like even as Abraham says in that story, he was suffering and now he's comforted. And when I became a parent, this kind of came home to me. The idea that when your kid is crying and scared, had a bad dream, whatever, what do? You hold that kid to your chest. It's what does the word bosom mean. So in a way, it's like this Lazarus or those who are deemed righteous, when they die after a long, hard life, whatever it is you went through, you are gathered to a place where it feels like, they're there. They're there. It's okay now. It's over now. You're good. You're safe. That's the emotions that this is supposed to carry. Which brings me to, if you don't mind, I'll just go right into the next word here that we decided to talk about, which is paradise. Paradise is a fun one. We talk about going to the other side to a place called paradise. This word, when I hear the word paradise, I am immediately back in Hawaii, like on my honeymoon. Okay, those are the words we use in the modern lingo, which is actually not far off. The word is a loan word from Persian, ancient Persia, okay, which would mean an enclosed place, like a park or garden, which was the Persians and the Babylonians were big on these hanging gardens and these beautiful places that they would create and enclose to protect them. So, when we say enclosed, don't just immediately think like gated community, but it's far better than that, and it's natural and it's nice. 3 times in the New Testament this is used. Very famously, Jesus says it to the thief on the cross as these 2 men are dying in Luke 23 on their crosses, and the guy says, which is an amazing statement of faith, to look at a dying man as you're dying and say, when you come to your kingdom, think of me. So he was acknowledging Christ as Lord and as the Savior and rescuer, and was pleading for mercy, even as he was dying. And so Jesus turns his head and says to him, truly I say to you, today you will be with me in paradise. And Paul talks about a man having a vision in 2 Corinthians 12. He says, I know a man in Christ, in other words, a fellow Christian, who 14 years ago was caught up to the third heaven. Third heaven, what's that? In the ancient Jewish understanding, first heaven is our atmosphere. It's where you can breathe. Second heaven is beyond our atmosphere, so stars, planets, comets. The third heaven is where the dwelling of God and the angels. Okay? So he's caught up there. And he says, whether in body or out of body, I do not know. God knows. And I know that this man was caught up into, now he says this sentence again, but he uses a different word, into paradise. Third heaven is paradise. Whether in the body or out of body, I don't know. God knows. And he heard things that may not be told or uttered. So he equates our typical ideas of heaven as paradise, where God is, where he wants to dwell with all people together. And I really want to emphasize here that once again, hell, quote unquote, is not this big cave that's on fire with demons poking you with pitchforks. And neither is heaven a cloudy space with people who look like they're half asleep strumming golden harps or flitting around on wings. The word he chooses to use is a garden term, a place of of everything you need to eat and great beauty and being provided for and complete in, and dare I say it, it harkens us back to Genesis 1 and 2, the Garden of Eden, where man and God are supposed to be together in harmony with a nature that's in harmony and beautiful and providing. So, Jesus says, and therefore I believe it's true, that when that guy who said it to Jesus, and he said, today you'll be with me in paradise, when that guy died, that day, he was there in that place. It comes up again when Jesus says it in John's revelations in the book of Revelation. Revelation 2:7, he says, he who has an ear, let him hear what the Spirit says to the churches. To the one who conquers, I will grant to eat of the tree of life, which is in the paradise of God. It's a reward for obedient, faithful Christians. But as the story is unfolding, we should see that it's not this celestial place alone, but a place that's someday to come on the new earth.
Would you say that verse in Revelation 2:7, the last book of the Bible, is using Eden's wordage to point back to what was in the beginning and the way things were supposed to be?
Absolutely. The book of Revelation, among many things, is a book that describes God's work to restore, finishing his work, I should say, to restore what Genesis 1 and 2 was all about. What broke at Genesis 3, if you look at a story, the setting is Genesis 1 and 2. The hook starting the tension is Genesis 3, the beginning of sin. Revelation is the falling action resolution. It is fixing what was wrong.
Could it be said, I'm thinking out of the box here, you're gonna have to run with me on this one. Everything that happened from Genesis 3 to the end of Revelation is parenthetical, and God is just continuing on with the plan that he had all along.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think what happens is, at the end, it says it in a lot of different ways. We will be his people. He will be our God. He will dwell with us. This almost sounds flippant, but I kind of feel like Jesus will at one point say, this is what I wanted this whole time. Why did you guys mess this up? This is what we wanted to do. Something like that, because we're getting back to what was intended, which is why, if you look at those graphs some people have made, where they take all the books of the Bible in a line and they draw lines, like this refers to that over there and this refers to that. The book of Revelation and the book of Genesis have the most connecting lines, the most hyperlinks, the most references to each other for this exact reason, I think. So, paradise correlates with the concept of heaven that we have in our head, but it corrects it in a lot of ways. It's a current reality and points to something in the future that we'll get to in a bit. But now that I've thrown the word heaven around, why don't you tell us about the Bible's usage of the term heaven?
Listening audience, I'd like to point out that Dan just stole 90% of what I was going to say about heaven, but we'll continue on anyways. As noted, the Bible speaks of 3 different heavens, and not all of them are concerned with the unseen world. The first is where the birds fly. The second is what we call space, where the sun and moon are. That becomes important later on. And the third heaven is the part of the unseen world. It is the abode of God, as seen in 2 Corinthians 12:2, the same passage that Dan just read to you. There are a total of 39 passages in Scripture that speak of a third heaven. And from these passages, we can come to the following 8 conclusions. The existence of a third heaven, the abode of God, has been testified of by eyewitnesses. Jesus came from there. He left the third heaven to live this life on earth sin-free. That's testified to in John 6. Paul was caught up to the third heaven to receive special revelation, 2 Corinthians 12. The Apostle John saw a vision of the third heaven and was told to come up there and to be shown the things to come, Revelation 4. Then came the hard part, to take what he saw and to put human words to it. This is the abode where God lives. It is also the abode of the good, elect, holy, unfallen angels reside there as well. Heaven is a real and definite place. Heaven is always upward. That is not to say that if you get into a spaceship and you fly upward, you're going to get there. It is a celestial, it is a spiritual place. It is not above the sky or above space. It is also the place where God rules providentially by sovereignty. Every aspect of his rule is from the third heaven. This is a place where God receives worship. When we read in Revelation about the angels falling, singing, holy, 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 this is in the third heaven. It is now the home of departed saints. No longer do believers go down to Abraham's bosom. They go directly to heaven, and it is the home of the departed. It is the home of the departed saints. Dan, many people believe that heaven is where we will spend eternity. I think of the song that says, when we've been there 10,000 years, bright shining as the sun, we've no less day to sing God's praise than when we first begun. My all-time favorite hymn, but it is not speaking of eternity correctly. We are not going to be in heaven as it is forever. And where we will be going, there is no sun, the big hot planet in the second heaven. Where will believers be spending eternity? You're up, Dan.
That's an amazing segue. The book of Revelation gives us a location called, and this is our final stop on the afterlife tour that we're doing right now, the New Jerusalem. Yeah, there are many passages in the Bible that talk about a new creation, but Revelation 21 gives us this detail. It says, "Then I saw a new heaven and new earth, for the first heaven and the first earth passed away, and the sea was no more." That's one of those sentences in the Bible, and there are a few of them, that just simply states something that's so unbelievably profound. All of creation is gone, and a new one is come. It just blows my mind. Verse 2, "And I saw the holy city, New Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God, prepared as a bride adorned for her husband." Let the reader understand. That does not mean a city in a wedding gown. That means a thing that has been made as beautiful as it can be made, being presented. "I heard a loud voice from the throne saying, 'Behold,'" is what I was saying before, "the dwelling place of God is with man. He will dwell with them. They will be his people, and God himself will be with them as their God. He will wipe away every tear from their eyes, and death will be no more. Neither shall there be mourning or crying or pain anymore, for the former things have passed away." It goes on to describe the city. If I won't get into all of it other than to say it's huge. It seems to be described as having a square base. And if this new earth has an atmosphere the size of ours, the height of this city actually breaks the atmospheric barrier and goes into space. So I don't know how this is going to work. This is a huge, beautiful, amazing city in which we will have direct access to God and Jesus Christ and be there forever. New heaven, new earth. Heaven itself, therefore, we must understand, will be emptied out into this new creation. And where this city is, it represents the place where we live together. And this is for those who are forgiven and saved by Christ to be with God. And this, not our ideas of heaven now, but this is where we will live forever. This is where that 10,000 years stuff is being described. If, to use an old phrase, the Lord does tarry, and doesn't tarry 10,000 years from when Martin Luther wrote that hymn.
Good stuff. Good stuff. Okay, Dan, in conclusion, we've studied a lot of different things here, but winding this up, unbelievers are going to remain in Sheol or Hades until the end of the Messianic kingdom. It is only after that the souls of the unbelievers will be taken out of Hades or hell. Revelation 20 describes this. This removal of the souls out of hell is known as the second resurrection, because all the bodies of the unbelievers will be resurrected, and all the souls of unbelievers will be removed from hell, and then hell will be eliminated. After the second resurrection, in which the souls of hell are removed and the bodies of the unbelievers are resurrected and reunited with those souls, all of those unbelievers will then stand before the great white throne of judgment. The purpose of this judgment, it must be noted, is not to determine whether they are saved or unsaved. That is determined forever upon death. The purpose is to determine the degree of punishment. Some will suffer more severely than others. After this judgment will come the final abode for all believers, the lake, After this judgment will come the final abode of all unbelievers, the lake of fire. If you're listening to this podcast, your eternity has not been finalized. An eternity of suffering in body and spirit within the lake of fire does not need to be your end destination. Dan, please explain the option that leads to eternity in heaven.
Yeah, with pleasure. We described the eternal state for the unbeliever as being in judgment for your sin, unplugged and cast out from all goodness and all rightness, which is God. Well, the obvious answer is to turn back to God. Now, you might say, how can I possibly do that? And that's a great question. And I hate to be the guy that says you can't get there, but we can't turn back to God. In fact, the scriptures say we don't want to. Deep down, the only reason we want to go to heaven someday is because our concepts of hell, or whatever word you use for it, are scary, and rightly so. It is a completely self-serving motive. We don't want to be more righteous. We don't want to be better people. I mean, to certain degrees we might, but ultimately we're just trying to escape judgment. So that motive even of itself is very self-serving. And you and I have been created by a God to be in relationship with him, and we reject that relationship with every act of sin that we do. We earn his wrath because we're self-serving. We don't care about what he says and what he wants. And what we need to do is recognize that. Recognize that we are sinners. Recognize that we have rejected our King, our Lord. And here's the good news. Jesus Christ, the divine Son of God, left the throne, came and lived among us, and lived a life unlike any one of us has ever lived. He lived without sin, obeying the Father, serving the Father, loving God and loving people perfectly. We don't love God and love people perfectly. He did. And then went to the cross because the humans around him didn't want him to live anymore. His way of teaching, his authority was too threatening to them. But the important thing of all of that is that the Father, while Jesus was on the cross, poured out his wrath upon him. He experienced Gehenna on the cross, rejected by God, crushed by God, punished by God, and died, dying the death that I deserve and you deserve, and then rose again on the third day as promised and in victory. So that passage in Hosea I read a lot earlier is quoted in the New Testament. Death, Sheol, where is your sting? It has been robbed. It has been redeemed. Death is no longer the pit and the darkness of death, but rather the light of what heaven is and the hope of this future new heaven, new earth, and the new Jerusalem. For those who have decided, I recognize my sin, I want to be forgiven. Lord, forgive my sin because of what Jesus has done for me. And I want to join into the victory that he gives. So Lord, please change my life and begin to teach me to be a follower of Jesus Christ. You say that to God today, he will always say yes and receive you and begin changing you immediately. And in fact, let me encourage you. The fact that if you want to say that today to God, I encourage you to do so. It's because he's tugging on you right now to turn to him. You do not have to experience what we, Dave and I, have been spending the majority of our time talking about right now. And that is the message of the Bible, that you can be a child of God, a follower of Jesus, and have a far greater destiny, not just after your death, but in your life right now, with Jesus involved in it. Turn to Christ for your forgiveness. Don't say, I'll get more religious. We're not telling you go to church more. What we're telling you is to surrender to Christ. The rest will follow. And an eternal and abundant life will begin the moment you do.
And that's the reason we do this. Good stuff.
Amen.
Good stuff.
It is good stuff. So, hey, now that we're ending this, let's talk about what's going on next week. What's our topic?
Next week, we're going to be doing a little bit different, but kind of the same. Two topics here. Where is Satan living? Another way to put that might be the abodes of Satan. Tune in and hear the answer to where he's living.
There it is.
Thanks so much for listening to our conversation today. If you want to reach us with a question or comment, feel free to email us at deepdivepodcast@proton.me. And if today's conversation was helpful to you, please like, subscribe, and share the podcast with a friend.
The intro and outro music you're hearing is Leave That Thing Alone by Rush from their Counterparts album. Once again, my name's Dan.
And I'm David. Thank you for listening to this Deeper Dive.